I hadn't even wanted to download the app. That's the part that gets to me looking back. It wasn't even my idea. I was a little over a year out of college, still living in a shared apartment on the east side of Brookwell with a girl I'd known since my sophomore year, Bree. She was the kind of person who jumped on every new trend, from vegan protein powders to infrared saunas and, of course, dating apps. "You're gonna die alone if you don't at least try, Lena," she said one night, flopped on our threadbare couch, thumbing through her own matches. "You never go out, you don't drink, and you still use a flip phone for emergencies." "I have a smartphone," I reminded her. "Barely." She wasn't wrong, though. I'd gone on exactly 2 dates the entire year, and both were painful, small-talk-filled disasters. I've always been cautious. Some people call it paranoid. But growing up the way I did kind of wired me that way. Raised by a single mom who had 2 locks on every window and never let me walk home alone. By the time I hit my 20s, that caution was more of a filter I viewed the entire world through. I didn't just walk into situations. I evaluated, researched, controlled the variables. Online dating felt like the opposite of control. Still, it wasn't like I was surrounded by viable options. So that night, I gave in. Not Tinder, that was a hard no, but something a little more low-key. I picked an app called Chatter that promised genuine connection and a more in-depth profile setup. I figured if someone was willing to answer questions and fill out a real profile, maybe they weren't just looking for a quick hookup. I uploaded 2 photos, one with a sweater, nothing flashy, and wrote a short, boring bio. Then I waited. I should mention something about myself. I've always had an irrational, gut-level fear of men. I say irrational because I've never been attacked, never assaulted, never stalked, at least not back then. But from the moment I was old enough to understand what fear felt like, it always clicked on around certain people. It wasn't about how they looked or dressed or even acted. It was this feeling I'd get, tight in my chest, heat behind my ears. It told me when to cross the street or take the long way home. My mom said it was women's intuition. But I sometimes wondered if it was just hypervigilance trained into me by a lifetime of caution. Still, I went into this dating thing with rules. Never give out my full name. Never give out my social media. Never meet unless I initiated it. Always tell Bree where I was going. Always meet in public. Simple rules. And they made me feel safe. At first, nothing really came of it. Lots of men opened with weird gifs or boring lines. I talked to a few guys here and there, but most fizzled after a day or 2. Then I matched with Evan. Evan's profile was clean. A few selfies, all of them warm and casual. A picture with a dog, he said it was his sister's. One at a food truck festival, one in front of the Chicago skyline. He was handsome in a non-threatening way. Soft jawline, glasses, a crooked smile. His bio read, "Not here to waste time. I'd rather know your favorite smell than your astrological sign. Introvert. Reader. Lame dad jokes included." It felt safe. Funny. Normal. I messaged first. "Favorite smell? Wood smoke after rain. Yours?" He replied almost instantly. "Fresh coffee. Also, wood smoke is a great pick. You have good taste." We went back and forth for over 2 hours that night. It was the kind of conversation that flowed without effort. Books we loved, food we hated, awkward teenage moments. He told me about his job, graphic design, his apartment, rented, small but cozy, and his mom's obsession with tarot cards. It was personal without being too much, and more importantly, he never pushed. That made me let my guard down. After 2 days of chatting, he asked if I was comfortable exchanging numbers. I hesitated, but then I thought, he hasn't been weird at all, and I could always block him, so I said yes. We moved to texting. It was nice. Nothing flirty or creepy, just steady, fun conversation. One morning, he sent me a picture of a fox crossing the street in front of his office. Another night, we talked about childhood cartoons for an hour. Then he asked for my Instagram handle. I froze. I'd never once mentioned Instagram. I wasn't active on it. I mostly used it to follow artists and a few personal friends. My account was private, and it used a variation of my middle name as the username. Hard to guess. I asked, "Why do you want my Instagram?" He replied, "Just curious. I like seeing more of the people I connect with." Fair. But I still told him I wasn't comfortable sharing that yet. That's when he said something I will never forget. "It's okay. I already know everything I need to know about you anyway." I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I replied, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I work in tech. I know how to dig when I need to. Don't worry. You're not a catfish. You're exactly who you say you are. That's rare." My mouth went dry. My hands actually trembled. I felt something inside me shift. "How do you know that?" I asked. "You use the same username on Tumblr and Pinterest. Took a few guesses. You posted a photo at Brookwell Central Library last week. You also like to post about cats with birthday hats. It's cute." I hadn't told him where I lived. I hadn't told him anything about those accounts. I didn't even use those sites anymore. I felt like someone had been following me in plain sight. That gut-level fear I'd carried since childhood roared to life. I told him what he was doing was invasive, that it was creepy, that he'd crossed a major line. His response? He laughed, like dozens of texts of ha 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 in all caps, not words. Just laughter. Then more texts came, paragraphs about how women lie online, how he was just making sure I was real, how I should feel flattered that he'd taken the time to check. I stopped replying. He didn't. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. He sent over 100 messages. Some were long rants. Some were just my name over and over again. Some were photos of places I'd recently been, clearly pulled from my social media. None of them were threatening exactly, but the volume of them was. It felt like he was trying to be inside my head, overwhelm me, drown me in noise. At 2:18 a.m., I got this text. "I'd never hurt you. You're special. I'm not like other guys. I just see you." That was the moment I realized I wasn't scared of what he'd said. I was scared of what he might do. I told Bree the next morning, showed her everything. She offered to call the police. But what would I report? He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't come to my apartment. He'd just found me. Online. I went to my cell provider and had his number blocked at the source. Then I changed my number completely. I deleted Chatter. I scrubbed my old Tumblr, locked down my Pinterest, switched my Instagram handle to something random and deactivated it. And then I waited. For days. Weeks. I kept checking my rearview mirror, kept wondering if I'd see him outside my building, but he never showed up again. The worst part was how violated I felt. I hadn't even been touched, but it felt like someone had peeled back my skin and stared at the nerves underneath. He didn't need to break in or hack anything. He just used what was out there. I stopped online dating completely. For years, I stopped trusting anything that looked too perfect. And even now, when I walk into a cafe or stand in line at the grocery store, I wonder if someone in the crowd is looking at me and thinking, "I know everything about her." Because it doesn't take much anymore. Just a name, a photo, a little time. If there's anything to learn from this, it's this. The danger isn't always in the stranger behind you on the sidewalk or the guy with too much to drink at the bar. Sometimes it's the nice guy with the crooked smile, the one who knows just what to say, the one who never raises a red flag until it's already too late. And he's not in your rearview mirror. He's in your phone. Back then, in 2005, dating apps weren't really apps yet. We didn't swipe right or get algorithmic soulmate recommendations. Instead, there were websites, Match.com, eHarmony, plenty of fish. I was on Match, mostly because it felt like the serious one. Not just hookups, not just weirdos, or so I thought. I was 27 and feeling that strange mix of societal pressure and genuine loneliness. Most of my friends were either getting married or diving headfirst into careers. I worked a quiet job in HR for a mid-sized printing company in Greensboro, North Carolina. My days were predictable, neat, safe. Nights got quiet. My profile was honest. I didn't exaggerate my hobbies or fake a love for hiking. I listed my favorite books, White Oleander, The Secret History, my weird obsession with watching old crime documentaries, and how I couldn't cook to save my life. He messaged me after I'd been on the site for 3 weeks. His profile said his name was Nathan, but that was probably a lie. He had one clear, well-lit photo, strong jawline, short dark hair, glasses. He looked like a software developer or maybe a professor. In the picture, he stood in front of some ivy-covered wall, wearing a dark blue sweater and khakis. Clean cut, harmless. Looking back, I realize it was a stock image vibe, almost too perfect. But I was naive and lonely, and I messaged him back. Our chats were slow at first. He asked about my job, my favorite places to eat in Greensboro. We joked about bad movies and terrible office coffee. It was so normal, so boring, that I convinced myself he had to be okay. I ignored the slightly stilted language. I ignored how he dodged answering questions about his own life with vague responses like, "Work keeps me busy," or "I'm in between places right now." After 2 weeks of messaging, he asked to meet in person. I hesitated but agreed. We met at a place called Maple and Birch, this trendy gastropub that had opened the year before near downtown. I arrived first and sat at the bar, heart thudding in my ears, sipping on a cranberry vodka. He showed up 10 minutes late, and the moment I saw him walk in, my stomach dropped. He did not look like his picture, at all. The man who approached me was skinnier, with thinning hair and a sharp nose that curved slightly to the left. He looked pale, nervous, and kept blinking like the lights were too bright. His shirt was wrinkled, and his shoes looked like they'd come from a clearance bin. But what stunned me more than anything was that he didn't acknowledge the discrepancy. Not a word. "Hey, you must be Lena," he said, sliding into the seat beside me like we were old friends. "Yeah," I replied, hesitant. "You're Nathan?" He grinned. "Of course. You're even prettier than your photos." I didn't respond. I just took a long sip of my drink and reminded myself I could always leave after one round. But he kept the drinks coming. Every time I got halfway through my cocktail, he ordered another. He convinced the bartender to do shots with us, some disgusting cinnamon liquor I barely kept down. He laughed too loud, leaned too close. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th drink, I realized I was way too drunk. "Hey," I mumbled, sliding my glass away. "I think I'm done for the night." He paid the tab in cash, no receipt, no card, no trail, and offered to walk me to my car. When I told him I took a cab, he offered to drive me home instead. I should have said no. I wanted to say no, but I was spinning, and he kept insisting. I gave in. The drive to my duplex took 8 minutes. The conversation was quiet. I watched the yellow lines blur past and focused on not throwing up. When he pulled up in front of my house, he didn't unlock the doors. Instead, he turned to me and grinned. "So, you want to fool around a bit before you head in?" My skin went cold. "Let me out," I said, voice low. "Come on," he chuckled, leaning closer. "You've been flirting with me for weeks. Don't tell me you're backing out now." He smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. His breath reeked of whiskey. "Let me out." He sighed, hand still on the lock button. "I just don't get why you'd waste my time if you weren't planning to put out. That's all I'm saying." I was quiet. The street was empty. Porch lights flickered on the opposite side, but no one was outside. When he finally unlocked the door, I opened it fast enough to almost fall out. I stumbled to the sidewalk and slammed it behind me. "Whatever," he muttered. "Stuck up, bitch." I didn't look back. I rushed inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor for 10 minutes before I could breathe again. The next morning, there was a bouquet of flowers on my back step. Roses. Sloppy handwriting on the card. "Sorry about last night. I had too much to drink. Please forgive me. Nathan." I stared at them for a long time before throwing them in the trash. But it didn't stop. Every few days something new appeared. a box of chocolates, a book I mentioned once in passing, a candle, a stuffed bear, always with a note, always apologizing, always signing his name like he knew me. The gifts shifted from sweet to creepy fast. One day it was a pair of earrings. Another day a bottle of perfume I used to wear in high school. The exact brand. I never told him about it. That's when I realized he'd probably gone through my trash. Or worse, he'd been watching me. I kept all the notes in a drawer. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Part of it was shame. I didn't want to admit to anyone that I'd been catfished, gotten drunk, and let this stranger drive me home. That I'd basically hand-delivered my address to a predator. Instead, I told my brother. He lived 40 minutes away, but he came and changed the locks. He also set up a cheap motion camera outside the back porch. It didn't catch much. Sometimes a squirrel. Once, a blurry shape that might have been him. The gifts kept coming. Until I snapped. I remembered the old Polaroid camera tucked in the top of my closet. I dusted it off, loaded it with film, and set it on my nightstand. Then I took my .380 pistol from the drawer. My dad gave it to me after a break-in at my old apartment, and placed it on my pillow. I snapped a photo. The image was simple. White sheets, a silver gun, soft lighting. On the bottom I scrawled in red Sharpie, "Next time you step on my property, this will be the last thing you see." I slipped the Polaroid into an envelope, taped it shut, and left it where he always left his gifts. The next morning, it was gone, and he never came back. 3 years later, I was out with my husband, Darren, at a steakhouse not far from Maple and Birch. We were waiting on our drinks when I noticed someone sitting at the bar alone. It was him, older, balding, cheeks sunken in, same nose, same pale eyes. He looked smaller somehow. He saw me, and Darren noticed. My husband knew the story, every disgusting detail. Darren stood, didn't say a word, and just looked at him. Nathan, or whatever his real name was, grabbed his bill, dropped cash, and left without a word. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel brave. I just felt cold. Because I knew that somewhere out there, another woman had probably matched with Initiate, and I prayed she didn't take a ride home. I didn't grow up dreaming of fairy tales. My mom worked double shifts to keep food on the table, and my dad wasn't in the picture, unless you count jail visits. I knew better than to expect magic or rescue, but like most girls with a cracked heart and a quiet bedroom, I still hoped someone out there might actually see me. Not the tired girl in oversized hoodies, not the shy cashier who bagged groceries at the Piggly Wiggly off of Hill Street. I wanted someone to see past the invisible version of me and say, "You matter." It was 1998, and online dating was still a weird, semi-taboo thing. Not quite mainstream, not quite shameful either. Just new. Mysterious. Dangerous, maybe. But we didn't say that out loud. Back then, I'd just graduated high school in Raleigh, North Carolina, still living with my mom and younger sister in a duplex that smelled like mildew and pine sol. I was 18 and spending way too many late nights on the family computer, clicking through chat rooms and early dating sites like Matchmaker.com and One and Only. I didn't even tell my best friend Carrie about it. She would have freaked. That's how I met Shane. At least that's the name he gave me. He messaged me late one night after I posted in a local North Carolina chat thread. His username was Wandering Soul 79. His profile had a grainy photo of him standing next to a dog, golden retriever maybe, face mostly shadowed. He said he was 22. Later I'd learned that was a lie. At the time he seemed funny, quick-witted. He had this poetic way of talking, like he'd read a few too many Sylvia Plath poems. He told me he was from Charlotte but was staying in Raleigh with friends. He said I had an old soul. Said my favorite band, Counting Crows, meant I was someone who actually felt things. I should have seen the red flags. But when you've never really been loved before, even a flickering match feels like a wildfire. We met in person 2 weeks later at a diner on Morgan Street. He was older, not barely older, not 22 like he said, more like 26, maybe 28. He had a roughness to him, tattoos curling up his forearms, a cigarette tucked behind one ear. But when he smiled, he looked like the kind of guy you'd see in a brooding indie film. It was disarming. "I didn't lie," he said, laughing when I called him out. "I just didn't want you to write me off." And I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. For the next year, Shane and I were off and on, mostly summer and fall flings. I'd ignore him when he'd disappear for weeks, then come crawling back when I got lonely. It was never real. Until it was. One December night, he showed up outside my job at Food Lion with a beat-up rose and a box of cherry Pop-Tarts. "I want to be with you," he said. For real, not just fooling around. It was freezing out. I remember that clearly. My hands were trembling, but not from the cold. And I said yes. By the time spring rolled around, I was still living at home, but spending almost every night at his place, an old rental behind a pawn shop. I was still working part-time and applying to Wake Tech, trying to juggle it all. He, on the other hand, kept losing jobs. Dishwasher at a bar, warehouse work. He'd quit or get fired and always blame someone else. "People don't like me because I don't kiss ass," he'd say, lighting another cigarette. At first, it was just arguments. I'd want him to apply for jobs or clean up, and he'd sulk. Get mean. Then it turned into accusations. "Why'd you wear that dress? Trying to make your boss stare at your tits? Why'd it take so long to get home from work? Who were you with?" I'd laugh it off. I told myself, he's just insecure. I tried harder to please him. I thought if I could just love him enough, it would get better. It didn't. I moved in with him full-time a few months after my 18th birthday. I thought it would be romantic, like a fresh start. Instead, it felt like being buried alive. I got accepted to Wake Tech and took night classes while working 2 jobs. He'd sleep in, smoke weed all day, and rage when I came home late. "You think you're better than me now?" he spat one night, knocking a bowl of leftover spaghetti off the table. Another time, he threw my textbooks out the window during an argument. Said, "If school's more important, then go sleep at the damn library." I started staying quiet, started dressing down, started lying to friends when they asked why I looked so tired. The first time he hit me, it was because I laughed too hard at something on TV while he was ranting. He punched my arm, said it was a reflex. "It's not abuse if you deserved it," he told me later. I believed him. When I got pregnant, I cried for hours in the bathroom. He was excited at first, or maybe it was the thrill of control he liked. "I got you now," he whispered once, running his fingers through my hair. "You're mine forever." I wasn't excited. I was terrified. Our son was born in the dead of winter, one of those brutally cold Januaries where the pipes freeze and the air stings your nose. I fell in love with that baby the moment I saw him. I promised myself I'd never let him see what his father was. I kept that promise as long as I could. The worst night of my life started out weirdly quiet. Shane had gone out with his friend Troy, a guy I barely knew but had seen around a few times. They came back late. It was snowing. I was sitting in the living room rocking the baby, watching ER reruns on mute. Shane came in, drunk or high or both. I could tell by the way he grinned at nothing, the way his eyes didn't focus. "House smells like shit," he muttered. "I just changed the baby," I said gently. "It's probably the diaper bag." He cut me off with a chuckle, but not a funny one, a mean one, the one he used before fights. I froze. "You always got a reason, huh?" he said, stepping closer. "Always got some fucking excuse." His friend Troy stood awkwardly near the door holding a beer. He looked uneasy. I picked up the baby, held him close. That's when Shane snapped. He screamed something I can't even remember now. Something about how I ruined his life. Then he lunged. I tried to run. Blocked. I handed the baby, my beautiful baby boy, to Troy and whispered, "Please just keep him safe." Then I turned around and took the first blow. He yanked my hair so hard I heard strands rip from my scalp, slammed me against the wall, kicked me in the ribs. I fell to the floor, gasping, tasting blood. I crawled toward the living room, toward the landline. Somehow, by some miracle, I grabbed it and hit 911 before he ripped it away. He slammed the phone into my face. My lip burst open. He choked me until the room turned black and silver. "I'm gonna kill you," he whispered. "I mean it this time." I believed him. But then, pounding, knocking. Police. I was dizzy, barely conscious, but I heard the front door open. Troy must have left it unlocked. Shane tried to lie, told the officers everything was fine, said the baby was just crying. Then I stumbled into view, bloodied, barefoot, split lip and swollen eye. I'll never forget the officer's face. He said nothing, just grabbed Shane and slammed him into the porch railing. The rest happened fast. Cops, ambulance, statements, flashbulbs, photos. A doctor told me I had a puncture wound in my lip and a hairline fracture in my cheek. Said I was lucky, that I could have been killed. One officer told me I was the worst beating victim he'd seen still breathing. Shane called from jail the next day. His exact words, "Why'd you do this?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you okay?" Just blame. Just venom. He was sentenced to 26 days in county jail. He served 0. Fled to Georgia before they could haul him in. Months later, he found me again. Sent messages. Left notes on my windshield. Showed up once outside my new apartment. I didn't break. I refused to go back. Eventually, he moved on. I wish I could say that's where it ended. But the next girl wasn't so lucky. Her name was Rebecca. I didn't know her personally, but I saw the article. He beat her, choked her, left her dead in a rented trailer in Macon. He was finally arrested, sentenced to life. The photo in the paper showed the same man who once kissed my forehead, brought me Pop-Tarts, and told me he loved me. But his eyes were empty. He'd always promised he'd feel nothing if he killed me. He meant it. I survived. Barely. My son is older now. Doesn't remember the early days, thank God. I've told him some things. Not all. Just enough. I'm married to a good man now. Someone who doesn't flinch when I raise my voice. Someone who never, ever makes me feel small. But some nights, I still wake up gasping. Still hear the phone cracking against my face. Still feel his hands around my throat. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't fade, it just stops bleeding. But scars remember everything. And so do I. I never used dating apps much. Not because I was above them, but because I'd already heard enough horror stories from friends to make me cautious. That, and I was a bit old-fashioned. I liked real conversation, real chemistry, things that happened face-to-face instead of from behind a glowing screen. But in 2013, the pressure was mounting. My best friend Nina was dating someone she'd met on Plenty of Fish. Another friend had just gotten engaged to a guy she'd met on OkCupid. Everyone made it seem like the easiest thing in the world. So one rainy Wednesday evening, tired of eating dinner alone and being the third wheel at game nights, I signed up for a new app that had just started gaining traction in our area, Zab. The app was minimalist, purple and white themed, with a Tinder-like swipe feature but without the sleazy reputation. It advertised, real connections for real people. I figured I'd just browse, maybe chat with someone just to prove I was making an effort. That's when I matched with her. Her name was Kara. Blonde, green eyes, soft smile. Nothing flashy, just a simple girl-next-door look. Her profile mentioned she was a fan of indie films, disliked tattoos, oddly specific, and preferred quiet nights at home over parties. She worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic downtown. No party pics, no bikini shots, no filters, just soft lighting and cardigans. Kara seemed safe. We talked for about 3 days. Her messages were polite, even a little awkward at times. She overused emojis and typed LOL a lot, but she asked genuine questions and never steered the conversation anywhere weird. That alone made her stand out. So by Saturday, we'd agreed to meet. I picked a local spot in Raleigh called The Landing. It was one of those mid-tier Americana restaurants with a vintage plane hanging from the ceiling and faux leather booths. I'd only been there once. It wasn't fancy, but it was neutral ground, public, well-lit, and with decent food. I got there a few minutes early, wearing my usual date night compromise, button-down shirt, jeans, clean sneakers. I didn't expect nerves, but I felt them. Maybe because Kara had been so normal online, it was almost too good to be true. Then she arrived. She wore a pale blue dress and flat shoes. No makeup except maybe a little mascara. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. She looked almost exactly like her photos, only more delicate in person, like a porcelain figure that could tip over with a gust of wind. "Hi, David," she asked, offering a small wave. "Yeah, Kara?" I replied, standing to greet her. She nodded, then walked straight into the booth and slid in, not across from me, but right next to me. That wasn't typical. It wasn't a crime either, but first dates usually started face to face. I hesitated for a second, then sat beside her. She smelled like rosewater and something faintly medicinal. "Sorry," she said, laughing softly. "I always feel weird sitting across from people. Makes me feel like I'm in an interview or something." I chuckled, unsure of what else to say. No worries. We started with the usual small talk. Where we grew up, what music we liked, what movies we'd recently watched. She didn't touch her menu. Mid-conversation, I felt her hand brush against mine on the booth seat. I moved slightly to give her space, thinking it was an accident. But then, deliberately, her fingers slid into my palm. I paused, eyes still on the menu, but now completely distracted. Was she holding my hand? I turned slightly, catching her eyes. She smiled warmly, not flirtatious, almost innocent. "Your hands are huge," she said, giving my palm a little tug. "Mine feel so tiny next to them." I smiled politely. "Yeah, I guess I have big hands." She interlocked our fingers without asking. That was the moment I knew something was off. But I didn't pull away. I told myself she was just quirky, overly affectionate. Maybe a little socially awkward. Then the waitress came. I tried to gently extract my hand to grab the menu, but Kara didn't let go. She ordered water. I asked for a Coke. The waitress glanced at our clasped hands, then smiled awkwardly and walked away. "Can you squeeze my hand a little?" Kara asked once we were alone. "What?" She giggled. "Just a little. Like squeeze it tight. Not too hard though. Just like you mean it." I played along, gently tightening my grip. "A little more?" she said. "Come on, squeeze harder." I gave her a firmer grip. She leaned her head on my shoulder and sighed like we'd been dating for months. "That feels nice," she murmured. "It's like you're grounding me. I feel so safe." When the food came, just a simple order of chicken tenders for me and a grilled cheese for her, she still hadn't let go. We tried to awkwardly eat with our free hands. I couldn't use my knife, so I just ripped pieces with my fork. She asked again, "Squeeze me. Like tighter. Like you want to crush my hand." My fork paused midair. "What?" I asked, not even trying to hide the confusion now. Kara's eyes lit up. "Just once. I want to know what it would feel like if someone really squeezed hard. I've always wondered how much pressure it would take to break the bones in a hand." I laughed awkwardly. "Are you serious?" She leaned in closer. "Try it, until I say ow. I want to know how strong you are." I gently pulled my hand back, but her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so petite. "Kara, that's not funny. It's just a game," she whispered. "Come on. What's the worst that could happen?" Now people were definitely looking at us. One woman at the booth across the aisle stared with open confusion. I felt the hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I finally tugged my hand free. Kara looked devastated, like I just told her a pet had died. "Oh," she said softly. Did I do something wrong? I began slowly. I think we might have different ideas about what a first date looks like. She stared at the table, face blank. It was just a joke. I thought you'd get it. You seemed fun online. I'm not trying to be rude, I said, already reaching for my wallet. But I think I'm gonna go. Don't go, she whispered. Her voice shifted, no longer playful. Please, it's just nerves. I swear I'm normal. I just get overwhelmed. I placed cash on the table and stood up. David, she said sharply. I turned. Her face had changed, no longer soft or sad, but cold, calculating. You don't know what you're walking away from. That sentence stuck with me. I didn't reply. I left the restaurant, walked straight to my car, and drove home in silence. I deleted Zab the moment I got home. Not just unmatched her, I nuked the whole account. She never called, never texted, never showed up at my door. But for weeks after, I kept thinking about her. That grip, those words, the dead tone when she said I didn't know what I was walking away from. What if I'd stayed? What was she really looking for? Part of me wonders if that was her fetish. Pain, submission, pushing boundaries. But something deeper in me suspects it wasn't sexual at all. There was something darker beneath the surface. Something more broken. A few months later, I told this story at a dinner party. My friend Sarah, a psychology grad student at the time, said it sounded like erotomania, a delusional disorder where someone believes another person is in love with them, usually someone they just met or barely know. But even that didn't sit right. Kara didn't act like someone who believed I loved her. She acted like someone who wanted to test how far I'd go, like she was trying to find the edge of something. Whatever it was, I wanted no part of it. But here's what keeps me up some nights. If she did that with me on a first date, what happened with the next guy who didn't walk away? And did she ever find what she was looking for? Because if she did, God help him. I never thought I'd say this, but I genuinely miss the days when dating meant being introduced to someone through a mutual friend or awkwardly locking eyes at a bookstore. There's something about meeting someone organically, reading their body language, hearing their voice before seeing a selfie, that online dating just can't replicate. My name is Jenna Wright. I'm a 33-year-old graphic designer living in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not shy, not even close. I'll talk to anyone, anywhere, about anything. I've been called intimidating by more than a few people, but I've learned not to take it personally. I'm 5'11", and not exactly built like the women you see in ads for yoga pants. I carry weight, strength, and a presence most men aren't used to. It makes me easy to remember, but hard to approach. I signed up for online dating mostly out of necessity. Real life just didn't offer enough chances. I was tired of coworkers playing matchmaker and equally tired of second-guessing whether the guy at Target was flirting or just looking for the last bottle of oat milk. For about 5 years, I was on every major dating app. OkCupid, Bumble, Hinge, even the obscure ones people don't talk about unless they're very desperate or very drunk. Most of it was exhausting. Copy-pasted pickup lines, dry conversations, ghosting, and way too many unsolicited pictures. But once in a while, someone would stand out. That's what happened when I matched with Eli. He had this almost boyish face, soft smile, glasses, short dark hair. His profile said he was 5 feet 4 inches, 31 years old, worked in IT support and loved classic rock. Not my usual type. I was typically drawn to taller, older guys, but he messaged first, and he was surprisingly funny. Witty, not too forward, and most importantly, respectful. We chatted for almost 2 weeks before we made plans. The first red flag came when he joked, "You're probably the only woman who's ever made me look like a ventriloquist dummy in photos." I laughed, at first, but then it kept going. "I bet you've crushed a watermelon with those thighs. I feel like you could bench press me. You're basically Wonder Woman, right?" It wasn't overtly gross, but it was constant. I tried to brush it off. I've learned not to punish men too early for nervous awkwardness. Maybe this was just his way of dealing with insecurity about the height difference. Still, by the time we met up at a downtown pub called Riley's, I was cautiously hopeful, but a little on edge. He was already there when I walked in, smaller than I expected, which I knew was coming, but still gave me a moment of pause. He stood up and gave me a hug that felt more like someone clutching a couch cushion. Not exactly romantic, but not unpleasant either. "Wow," he said, looking up at me like I was the Eiffel Tower. "You really are statuesque." There it was again. We sat, we drank. The conversation flowed easily. He liked old horror movies, obscure documentaries, and owned his own townhouse. He had a rescue cat named Gadget and sent his niece handmade birthday cards. Honestly, I liked him. Despite the strange comments, he had this gentle, almost vulnerable energy that felt refreshing after a string of cocky broke man children with vape pens and zero ambition. But halfway through the second drink, the conversation took a turn. "You ever pick a guy up?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Like, in a bar?" "No, like, physically. Just lift someone." I gave a polite laugh, unsure what to say. "I guess maybe in high school? I played volleyball." He nodded slowly, eyes gleaming a little too brightly. "I bet you could lift me, maybe even throw me." I smiled, awkward now. "Probably." "I'd like that," he said. I changed the subject. The rest of the night was short. I told him I had an early meeting the next day and ended it with a quick hug. He didn't press for a kiss. That surprised me. When I got home, I debated whether to keep the conversation going. He was kind, articulate, and definitely into me. Maybe a little too into me. Still, I decided to give him a second chance. I texted that I'd be open to another date. His response? "I can't wait. Do you think you could lift me over your head next time? Maybe just once. It'd mean so much." Okay, no more ambiguity. I gently replied that I wasn't comfortable with the direction things were going, that while I understood people have preferences and kinks, I wasn't interested in being someone's fantasy prop. He took it well. Surprisingly well. "Thanks for being honest," he said. "You're cool. No hard feelings." I actually felt a little guilty for being relieved. But Eli wasn't the worst. That would be Travis. I matched with Travis on OkCupid about 8 months after Eli. At first, it was just typical small talk. His profile said he was a paramedic, 36, recently single. We never met. In fact, he stopped responding after a week. No big deal. I barely noticed. Then 3 months later, he reappeared in my inbox. "Hey, Jenna. Sorry I disappeared. Was in something that got kind of serious. It's over now, but she's still kind of in my life, you know? Complicated." I didn't know, actually. But I was bored and curious. We chatted a bit. He explained they were on again, off again. That they had great chemistry in the bedroom but argued too much to stay together. "This is gonna sound weird," he texted late one night. "But would you ever consider a threesome?" I stared at the message for a full minute. "Excuse me? I mean, not like now, but maybe someday." We were talking and she said she always wanted to try with a bigger woman. "You crossed my mind. You're hot. No offense." No offense. As if that made it polite. I told him off, firmly, not cruelly, and blocked him. Then deleted the app. That was the moment I stepped away from online dating completely. For 6 months, I stayed off everything. Focused on work. Took myself out to movies. Spent time with friends who never made me feel like a novelty. I wasn't bitter. Just tired. Then one afternoon, standing in line at a bookstore cafe, I dropped my wallet. The guy behind me picked it up. Tall, scruffy, wearing a paint-splattered hoodie and boots that had definitely seen better days. "You dropped this," he said, handing it to me with a smile that actually reached his eyes. That's how I met Marcus. He wasn't from an app, didn't have a clever bio or filtered selfies. We got to know each other one latte at a time. He worked in renovations, loved poetry, hated texting, and called me gorgeous without turning it into a punchline. It's been over 2 years now. Sometimes when people ask how we met, I lie and say through a mutual friend. I don't know why. Maybe I just want to keep something for myself. Something unscripted, unfiltered, real. But if you ask me whether online dating is a nightmare, it's not all horror. But you'll walk through some shadows before you see the light. And if you're anything like me, tall, loud, built like a linebacker, and still soft in the heart, just remember, the right person won't fetishize your strength. They'll respect it, and maybe even love you for it. I wasn't looking for love, but I was definitely looking for something. Let me start from the beginning. At the time, I worked in a job that people either quietly respected or secretly judged. Technically, it was legal. I was a hostess in a private men's lounge in central Arizona. Think high-end, adults-only, members-only type of place. It wasn't prostitution, not exactly, but it danced along the line of sex work. I was paid to entertain men, mostly wealthy, lonely ones, while dressed in designer lingerie and heels that cost more than my rent. I kept things flirty and light, knowing exactly how to toe the line. The money was good, the hours were short. The danger, well, that part I ignored. Back then, danger was something I craved. It made me feel alive. I was 27, living alone in a duplex outside Mesa. No boyfriend, no kids, no boss breathing down my neck. My life was unstructured, mostly ruled by night. I'd work 4 or 5 evenings a week and spend the rest of my time sleeping in or swiping through dating apps in bed. I kept work and personal life completely separate. The men who paid my bills were never going to be the men I dated. I had it in my head that somewhere out there was a guy who could give me the emotional closeness I craved. And I was going to find him. That's how I met Jaden. He messaged me on Hinge. From the moment I saw his profile, I felt like he was made in a lab just for me. Messy dark hair, a crooked grin, a book on Eastern philosophy in one photo, and a pit bull named Tyson in another. His first message wasn't cheesy or pervy. It was a dry joke about my favorite movie tucked into the last line of my profile. I smiled. I replied. That was the beginning of what I now call the bait. Jaden and I messaged constantly. Mornings, evenings, even while I was at work, I'd sneak into the dressing room to read his texts. He was smart, flirty, and made me feel like I wasn't just someone to look at. We talked about music, politics, family. I told him I worked in event coordination, and he didn't press for details. He told me he freelanced in tech and worked from home. Everything about him seemed calm and centered, like the opposite of every man I'd ever known. 2 weeks in, we were still texting daily, but hadn't met. I didn't mind. I liked the anticipation. But one Friday night after my shift, I messaged him. Me. I'm off work. Want to meet? Jaden. Yeah, come over. I'll text you the address. I hesitated for a second. Then I got in my car and drove. He lived in a quiet neighborhood in Tempe, one of those cookie-cutter suburbs with identical porches and trimmed hedges. When I pulled up, the porch light was on. My stomach flipped when I saw him in the doorway. He was even better in person. Hey, he said, smiling wide as he stepped aside to let me in. Inside, the place smelled like cedar and weed. There was soft music playing, some ambient synth stuff I didn't recognize. We didn't make small talk. Didn't sit on the couch. Within 5 minutes, we were kissing against the wall. Clothes came off fast. My head was spinning, not just from lust, but from the sheer rush of it. Finally meeting someone I felt a connection with, someone who didn't know the version of me I wore at work. But the mood shifted quickly. Jaden's kisses became rougher. His grip tightened. At first I thought maybe he was just dominant, but something felt off. He said things, dirty things, that bordered on cruel. Not playful, not sexy. Cruel. You like being used, don't you? He whispered. What? I blinked. He looked down at me, hand tightening around my throat. "Don't act surprised. I know where you work, I know what you do." I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. He kept going, kept saying things about me. True things. The layout of the lounge, the name of my shift manager, even a detail about a tattoo I usually kept hidden. My mind raced. This wasn't a stranger. Somehow he knew me from work. Maybe he'd been a client. Maybe he'd found me on an old burner profile. Maybe someone I trusted had given him my number. Either way, I was naked, in his bed, and suddenly very unsafe. The next part of the night is a blur. What happened was violent. I was in and out of consciousness. I don't remember crying. I remember trying not to. I remember waiting for it to be over. Afterward, he acted like nothing was wrong. Offered me a drink. Told me to stay the night. I couldn't leave. I was dizzy. I was terrified. I lay there, stiff and silent, pretending to sleep, while every nerve in my body screamed to run. But I didn't. I was too scared of what he'd do if I moved. By sunrise, I slipped out the door. I barely remember the drive home. I told my coworkers what happened. Their reactions were split. A few brushed it off, said maybe I was being dramatic. One actually laughed and said, "That's what you get for playing house with a stranger." Another looked uncomfortable and told me to forget about it. Two of them knew Jaden, said they'd seen him before, said he was cool, and that I must have sent mixed signals. It was worse than being ignored. It was being blamed. So I turned to my real friends, the ones outside of work. That didn't go well either. They all knew what I did, and they danced around the topic like my job somehow made this inevitable. "You put yourself in that position," one said. "Why'd you go to his house?" another asked. I didn't have the strength to argue. The next day, I went to a clinic. I needed to know, was I pregnant? Had I caught something? What did he do to me when I blacked out? The clinic was warm and quiet. There were mismatched chairs and a little table with puzzles for kids. I sat alone in the corner scrolling on my phone, trying to pretend none of this had happened. That's when I saw it. A screenshot, my Tinder profile, my bio, and one of my messages, twisted into a meme. It was circulating on a gossip page that catered to local nightlife. Jaden had shared it. He had taken what happened and turned it into a joke. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I wept quietly in the waiting room, arms folded tight around myself. My test results came back, negative across the board. No STDs, no pregnancy, no physical souvenir of the trauma. But emotionally, I was ruined. Jaden never contacted me again. He didn't have to. He got what he wanted. Then he vanished. I left the lounge job not long after. Couldn't keep pretending to be someone unbreakable. I still wonder how he found me. Which moment was the one that exposed me? What detail? What slip? It doesn't matter now. What matters is this. I wasn't believed. I wasn't protected. I wasn't taken seriously. Because of my job. Because I went to his house. Because to them, I should have known better. Please, learn from my mistakes. Don't confuse attention for affection. Don't let someone isolate you with flattery. Don't go somewhere alone just because you want to believe it's safe. And never, ever assume that just because something feels good at first, it means you're safe. Because monsters don't always hide in alleys. Sometimes they smile at you through a dating app. I was 21 when I matched with the man who would leave a shadow on my memory I'd never fully shake. It was a time when I still believed in the potential of dating apps. Swipe, match, flirt, meet, repeat. Nothing too serious. I was young, newly single, and freshly navigating motherhood. My daughter was barely one, and the world felt like a giant reset button I wasn't sure how to press. Back then, I used a few apps. Tinder, Hinge, even OkCupid on occasion. I wasn't naive. I knew to look out for the usual red flags: too handsome, too mysterious, overly sexual, or oddly vague. I stayed cautious, but I also craved attention and adult conversation. There's something about being up at 3 a.m. with a baby on your chest that makes even the most boring match seem like a good distraction. That's when he popped up. His name was Mark, and he was 30. Almost 10 years older than me, which normally would have been a deal breaker. But there was something reassuring about his profile. He looked normal. Not movie star handsome, but clean, thoughtful, kind. He had a rescue dog, enjoyed camping, liked indie music, and his bio included a line that said, "I don't want to waste time, I want to build something real." I remember pausing. Most guys said things like, "No drama," or "just here for a good time." Mark sounded grown up, grounded. We matched on a Thursday. By Friday night, we were texting nonstop. It's hard to describe how quickly things progressed because it didn't feel fast at the time. It felt easy, natural. He asked all the right questions about my daughter, my goals, what kind of music I played around the house. He told me he'd dated younger women before, not because he was that guy, but because he said women his age were often jaded or bitter. It was flattering to be called fresh and optimistic. He didn't send any inappropriate photos or ask for any from me. In fact, he seemed to tiptoe around any sexual talk entirely, which was oddly refreshing. He said he wanted to earn my trust first. The word earn stuck with me. By Sunday, he was saying things like, "Mark, it's wild how easy it is with you, like I've known you in another life." Me, "Ha, a past life soulmate?" Mark, "Maybe. Maybe this is just the lifetime where we finally get it right." Corny? Yeah. But when you're lonely and tired and someone's telling you they want to build a life with you without even meeting you first, it hits differently. By Monday, he'd asked for a picture of my apartment so he could imagine what our mornings might look like. By Tuesday, he was suggesting we move in together eventually. By Wednesday, he was making a list of household items we had duplicates of, like actually making a spreadsheet: 2 coffee makers, 1 couch, 1 dining table, 2 blenders. He even joked we'd need a joint email soon. It was all so domestic, so innocent, so adult. But what really shook me was what he said Thursday night. "Mark, I know this might sound crazy, but I'd be honored to be part of your daughter's life, if you let me." I remember sitting in my kitchen, staring at that text, and tearing up. No one had ever said something like that before. Her father had bailed the moment the pregnancy test came back positive. I was so used to men seeing her as baggage, but not Mark. Mark said she was a blessing. He even described how he'd help with nighttime feedings, reading to her, teaching her to ride a bike one day. I'd known him 7 days. Looking back, I realize how much I wanted to believe it. We agreed to meet for dinner at a restaurant in Fairview, a quiet suburban town outside my city. He picked the place, said he wanted somewhere cozy, where the food didn't matter as much as the company. I wore a simple navy dress and a cardigan. I wanted to look mature, not like some 21-year-old kid. I was nervous, sure, but mostly excited. I kept thinking, what if this really is it? What if this is the start of everything I've been hoping for? He was already seated when I arrived, but the man sitting there didn't match the one I'd been talking to all week. Yes, he looked the same. Broad shoulders, dark eyes, shaved head. But the energy was off. He stood to greet me, didn't smile, didn't hug me. He just said, "Hey," and gestured for me to sit. His eyes locked onto mine like they were searching for something hidden beneath my skin. At first I assumed he was shy, maybe nervous. Maybe the in-person chemistry hadn't kicked in yet. But it never did. For 2 full hours, Mark barely spoke. He nodded occasionally, offered a grunt here and there, but mostly he just stared, not glancing, not admiring. Stared, expressionless, unblinking. He watched my eyes, then my mouth, then my hands, then back to my eyes. And every time I looked away, at the menu, at the waiter, at my drink, I could still feel his gaze boring into me. I tried asking questions, tried cracking jokes, tried being vulnerable, silly, even completely silent just to see if it would break the weird tension. Nothing worked. The only time he spoke was when the check came and he said, "We'll split it." That was it. I went home shaken, confused, a little embarrassed. I lay awake that night thinking maybe he'd had a bad day. Maybe social anxiety had gotten the best of him. But a part of me, the gut part, was screaming that something was very, very wrong. The next day, he texted like nothing had happened. "Mark, had such a nice time last night. I think we should plan something bigger next. Maybe a weekend at the lake?" I stared at the message, stunned. Was this guy delusional? Me. "Hey, I don't think we're a good match." I didn't really feel a spark in person. That started a full hour of back and forths. He didn't argue or beg. He just kept replying in long, poetic, borderline obsessive texts. I know we're meant to be. I felt it across the table. Even in silence, it was loud. "You're just scared. I can be patient. Don't walk away from the person who'd die for your daughter." It was like trying to break up with a ghost that thought it was still alive. Eventually, I told him clearly, finally, "Mark, I'm not interested. Please don't contact me again." To which he replied, "Okay, I get it. Just know I'll be here. Always." And then, silence. He never messaged me again. He unmatched me. Vanished. But I still think about that dinner. That stare. How I couldn't eat my food because I felt like an animal under a microscope. How my chest hurt from holding my breath too long. I never saw Mark again. But sometimes, I catch glimpses of that expression. On strangers at gas stations, on men in crowded trains, on quiet faces in restaurants. And every time my stomach drops. Because I know now, love doesn't come at you in a week. Real love doesn't watch you like prey. And some men wear kindness like a costume until they're close enough to unzip it. I had just graduated from college when it happened, barely 23, working a temp admin job at a logistics company and living alone for the first time. I had this small but cozy one-bedroom suite in a divided duplex on the west end of Maple Ridge, a quiet suburb just outside Vancouver. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My name's Callie, and I'll never forget the way my entire perception of people changed during that summer. Back then, like most people my age, I was riding the high of newfound independence. No more dorm rooms or communal bathrooms, just me, my IKEA furniture, and the endless scroll of dating apps on my phone. I wasn't new to dating apps, but I wasn't exactly seasoned either. My roommates in college used them constantly, so I joined in partly out of curiosity and partly out of boredom. I stuck mostly to Plenty of Fish, because it felt less hookup focused compared to Tinder, at least on the surface. I wasn't reckless, but I also wasn't cautious. I used my real first name, a profile picture that showed my street in the background, and I didn't blur my license plate in one of the pictures where I stood beside my car. At the time, it didn't even cross my mind that those things could be dangerous. That's when I matched with Ethan. He was 31, nearly a decade older, but I figured age wasn't everything. His pictures looked normal. A clean-cut guy with strong cheekbones, dressed in a fitted navy blazer and gray slacks, standing in front of a financial firm downtown. Another picture was him on a hike, smiling with a small dog on a leash. He had nice teeth, short brown hair, and light eyes, somewhere between hazel and green. In his bio, he said he was a project consultant for an engineering firm, lived on the East End, worked long hours, and just wanted someone normal. He sent the first message. "You seem like you have your life together, that's refreshing." That turned into a week of steady back and forths. He wasn't pushy or weird. He asked about my job, my studies, even asked to see my art portfolio when I mentioned I used to draw. He noticed small things like the mug in one of my selfies. "That your favorite tea? Or are you more of a coffee purist?" It felt so genuine, so intentional, and he was funny, just the right mix of sarcastic and kind. By the 5th day, I found myself smiling when his name popped up. When he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I agreed. He picked a quiet Mediterranean place near the harbor, downtown Vancouver. It was far, like 45 minutes from my place, but I didn't mind. Maybe that was a good thing. Neutral ground, right? When I got there, he was already waiting outside in a charcoal coat. He smiled when he saw me and held the door open. I'll admit, he looked even better in person. Not in a movie star way, but polished. Put together. The dinner went great. Conversation flowed naturally. We talked about travel, books, even our most embarrassing moments. He laughed when I told him I once ran into a sliding glass door at a friend's barbecue. He told me he once walked into the wrong Zoom meeting, thought it was a client call, and pitched a full financial strategy to a group of teachers. At the end of the night, he hugged me, not too tight, not awkwardly, and said, "This was really nice, Callie. Let's not wait too long to do it again." I smiled, said I'd text him when I got home, and drove off into the city night. But something felt off. After 2 turns, I noticed a car behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. Vancouver's downtown traffic is messy. But then, after 20 minutes of weaving through freeways, he was still behind me. When I took an exit briefly and looped back onto the main route, he followed. I wasn't immediately scared. Maybe he just lived in my direction. But then he didn't take any of the exits. I began circling the city on the Trans-Canada Highway like I was lost on purpose, and still, every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, there he was. That's when the panic started. My hands began to sweat on the wheel. I turned the radio off. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't go home. So instead, I pulled off on the east side and took the long way to my friend Liz's apartment. She lived in a high-rise with secured parking. When I turned into her street, he didn't. Relief washed over me. It must have been a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't even him. Maybe I was being paranoid. I didn't even get out at Liz's. Just sat there for 5 minutes until I felt brave enough to go home. When I finally made it back to my place, I parked, got inside, and headed for the shower. As the water ran, my thoughts spiraled. Was I just imagining it? Was it really him? Maybe I was overreacting. I wrapped myself in a towel, grabbed my phone, and began typing a casual message. Just as I was about to hit send, a message came through. It was a photo. My car, parked right outside my home, taken just minutes ago. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I stared at it like it would disappear if I blinked fast enough. Then another message. "I didn't know you lived across the street from me. What are the odds?" I froze. I had never seen this man in my neighborhood. I knew my neighbors. Sure, there was a massive apartment complex kitty corner across the intersection, but what were the chances? Then there was a knock. I peeked out the living room curtain. He was standing there, hands in pockets, like this was a casual check-in. "Hey," he said. "Still up? Want to hang out?" "I'm exhausted," I called out through the door. "Long day, I'm crashing." He hesitated. "All right," he said finally. "Another time?" He left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, lights off, TV on low, clutching a knife I kept in the kitchen drawer. When I finally drifted off at dawn, it was out of sheer exhaustion. I woke up at 8 a.m. to the sharp chill of dread. I pulled on a hoodie and went outside. My windshield had been shattered. Both passenger side tires were slashed. There were keys gouged across my driver's side door, 3 long, angry lines. And then, as I was frozen there, staring at the damage, he walked up with 2 coffees. "Morning," he grinned, like nothing was wrong. "Figured I'd surprise you. I remembered you like oat milk." My mouth went dry. My body was screaming at me to run. "Thanks," I said, taking the coffee just to avoid conflict. "But I can't go to work with my car like this." "I'll drive you," he offered, smiling like this was a rom-com. I forced a weak smile. "No, it's okay. I already called in. Police are coming." His smile faded slightly. He stayed for 2 hours waiting on the sidewalk, leaning against his car like he lived there. When the cops finally came, he walked away, hiding behind his own vehicle like a child caught stealing. I filed the report, gave them every detail. They said what cops always say. Hopefully you've got full coverage. Change your locks if you can. Block him. Don't engage. And then, as they were about to leave, one of the officers got a radio call. He stopped, turned his head and shouted, "Freeze! Hands in the air, on your knees." I turned and saw Ethan, now on the pavement, being cuffed at gunpoint. Apparently he was already wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a weapon, fraud, aggravated assault. The officer told me he shouldn't have even been in my city. He had moved without notifying his parole officer. I couldn't stop shaking. I just kept picturing everything that could have happened. I took the next few days off work. Liz came over. So did my brother. I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. 1 week later, I opened my front door to leave for work, and there he was, sitting in my driveway. Canada's justice system is built on conditions and releases. He wasn't convicted yet, so he was out on bail. I swallowed my scream, forced a smile, and said, "Hey, I'm late for work. Can I call you later?" He nodded. I never went to work that day. Instead, I drove across town to a real estate agent's office. I terminated my lease, changed my number, and moved in with Liz and her fiancé. I didn't even go back to pack. I sent Liz's fiancé and his friends. For the next month, they kept all my stuff at their place until I found a new apartment in a high-rise with key fobs, gated parking, and security cameras on every floor. I never heard from Ethan again. But I changed everything. My online habits, my comfort with strangers, my faith in red flags. I still sometimes dream about waking up and seeing him standing at the foot of my bed. That was my first and last experience with Plenty of Fish, and the last time I ever let a first date follow me home. I wasn't always a big fan of online dating. In fact, for the longest time I hated it. The fake smiles, the over-edited selfies, the 3-word bios that said absolutely nothing about a person. It all felt like a scam. But things changed after I moved to Brookville, a city not small enough to know everyone, but not big enough to easily meet people offline. I had just gotten out of a 2-year relationship. Not a bad breakup, just one of those slow-burning fizzle-outs where love quietly packs its bags and leaves before either of you realizes it's gone. After a few months of working late, coming home to an empty apartment, and scrolling through other people's relationships on Instagram, I gave in and re-downloaded Tinder. Just for fun, I told myself. But that's how it always starts, right? It wasn't long before I got back into the habit, updating my bio, changing my location when I traveled, adding a fresh photo every few weeks. I matched with a lot of people, most of whom I never talked to beyond a few opening lines. It was background noise, something to swipe through during lunch or late at night. Eventually, I deleted Tinder altogether. I switched to Instagram. It felt more natural, at least that's what I told myself. No swiping, no awkward bios, just photos and comments. Of course, IG has its own version of catfish, but I figured I was smart enough to tell what was fake and what wasn't. That's when I first saw her. Her username was @CallieJean. She had bright auburn hair, full lips, and this kind of retro pinup style, not overdone, just unique enough to stand out. I noticed her commenting on a lot of my friends' photos, mostly guys. Some of them replied, some didn't. But she was active. Stories every day, tons of selfies, travel shots, mirror pics in what looked like upscale apartments. One night she left a comment on one of my reels. "You're funny. You remind me of someone I used to know, LOL." I clicked on her profile again. Nearly 15,000 followers. She was following less than 300. Verified. Number. But everything looked real. No watermarked pics, no obvious filters, no sketchy links in bio. Just a gorgeous woman who apparently thought I was funny. So I DM'd her. Didn't expect much. Just said, "You have jokes too, or just compliments?" She replied in under an hour, "Callie, A little of both. Depends if you can keep up. I remember grinning at my phone. We messaged for almost 3 hours that night. It felt easy, unforced. She was witty, said she worked in PR, grew up in New York but moved south for a slower life. She talked about loving to cook, missing city food, and said she hated how people assumed she was fake just because she was pretty. Over the next 2 weeks, we talked every day. Morning voice notes, lunchtime DMS, late-night chats. She sent selfies that matched her timeline photos, made video calls in dim lighting, always just getting ready for bed, and even shared clips of her cooking while singing along to R&B tracks. I told my friends about her. Most were impressed. A few were openly jealous, except Ryan. Ryan and I had known each other since college. He was skeptical of everything, especially online dating. "You ever talk to her on the phone?" he asked one night at our usual dive bar. "Yeah," I said, sipping my beer. "She sent voice notes and we FaceTimed twice. Real short, though." He raised an eyebrow. "So, never a full conversation?" "Bro, it's 2023. Nobody wants to talk on the phone." He laughed, but not the friendly kind. "All right, just don't show up on the news talking about, 'I thought she was real.'" I brushed him off, but in the back of my mind I knew he had a point. 3 weeks in, Callie invited me over. "Let me cook for you," she said. "I make the best jerk shrimp pasta, unless you're allergic." "No allergies," I joked. "Except to red flags." She laughed. "Good. I only have pink ones." I asked for the address. She lived in Merrow Heights, a neighborhood about an hour from Brookville. Said she rented the top floor of a duplex. Quiet place. Decent area. I looked it up. Google Street View showed older homes, narrow roads. Not fancy, but nothing too sketchy. Still, I hesitated. Ryan's voice echoed in my head, "Don't be stupid." But the rest of my friends, they egged me on. "Just don't get her pregnant," one of them joked. "If she can cook, marry her," said another. "Send us the address in case you disappear." I laughed it off. I got in my car at 8 p.m., texted her I was on the way, and played a crime podcast on the drive to distract myself. By the time I turned into Merrow Heights, the sun had disappeared behind the skyline. The neighborhood looked different than I expected. Not terrifying, but busier. People on porches, kids riding bikes in the street. Loud music from somewhere. Not a single streetlight worked. I stopped at a red sign 2 blocks from the pin on my GPS. A group of men walked up to my car. "What you need, bro?" one of them asked, tapping on the passenger window. I didn't answer. Just slowly drove forward and turned the corner. The duplex was older, paint peeling, bars on the downstairs windows. I parked across the street, took a breath, and messaged her. "Me. Here. Upstairs, right?" Callie. "Yep, come up." Doors open. I climbed the narrow steps, heart beating faster with each one. There were voices nearby, people outside talking, laughing, cussing. I knocked once. The door creaked open almost immediately, but it wasn't Callie. A bald white guy stood there instead. Patchy beard, tattoos creeping up his neck and onto his scalp, a tank top and cargo shorts. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Is Callie here?" I asked. He smirked. "Yeah, come in." My instincts screamed no, but I stepped inside. The living room was small, dark, and reeked of mildew and something sharp, like cheese left out too long. The furniture was old. Dust clung to the TV screen like static. An ashtray overflowed on the coffee table. "She'll be out in a sec," he said, sitting across from me. "Want something to drink?" I hesitated. "Sure." While he disappeared into the kitchen, I pulled out my phone and texted her again. "Me. Can you come out, please?" She replied instantly. "Callie." "Of course." 1 second. Then I saw it. The guy's phone, a beat-up Android, was on the table. When I texted, the phone lit up. My name showed on the lock screen. My heart dropped. I fake scratched my arm. "Hey man, got any tissues?" I asked. He walked off again. I picked up the phone and texted her again. Me. Who the hell are you? The phone vibrated. My name appeared again. I set the phone down just as he walked back in with two mismatched cups. He handed me one. We sat in silence for a moment, the TV on but muted. Then the phone vibrated again. He looked at it. I looked at it. Then we looked at each other. He stood up slowly. I guess you figured it out. I stood too. I'm leaving. He moved fast, tried to grab me by the arm. I swung, hard, and caught him in the jaw. He stumbled, fell into the coffee table. I didn't wait. I ran. Down the steps, into the street, into my car, locked the doors and peeled off. I drove until I saw a gas station with lights on, parked, and called the cops. By the time they got there, the guy was still on the floor, dazed and groaning. There was no Callie, no sign of a woman ever living there. Just one cracked phone with dozens of messages. From me, from other guys. Voice memos faked with audio apps. Pictures lifted from a Canadian influencer's public account. I was one of many. The officer said I was lucky. Guys had been lured in before. Some lost money. Others lost phones, wallets, even got jumped by 2 or 3 people hiding in the next room. Me? I got away with a bruised knuckle and a broken sense of trust. I never used Instagram to meet women after that. I deleted the app for a while. Started dating the old-fashioned way again. Slow, in person, awkward. But every now and then, I see a new comment under one of my friend's pictures. Same style, same flirty tone. And I wonder if it's him again. Waiting. Setting the bait. Because next time, the guy might not punch back.